In 2012, when there was very little content about Ayn Rand on YouTube, I began creating small clips of her interviews. They were simple videos, edited in my bedroom on a barely functioning computer, but they ended up becoming some of the first objectivist viral videos on the internet. On my channel alone, they reached over 800,000 views. Copied and shared across other profiles on social media, they reached millions. At that moment, I had one conviction. Popularizing Rand would only be a matter of exposure. But almost 15 years later, I think differently. In 1957, Ayn Rand published Atlas Shrugged. The book still sells hundreds of thousands of copies every year. And yet, objectivism remains culturally marginal. This difficulty puzzles many Rand fans, and it may be the most crucial question in the objectivist movement. I believe I have a good answer to this. It's an answer that has been right under our noses all this time, but one we've refused to see. Objectivists tend to think that the philosophy hasn't spread simply because of numbers and lack of marketing. But if objectivism had the potential to dominate culture, the exposure it has already had would have been more than enough for its ideas to go viral, especially in the communication age. Imagine an entrepreneur trying to push a product and, 60 years after its release, after being tested by millions of people, he still insists its lack of popularity is a marketing problem. At that point, a smart entrepreneur would have already considered two possibilities. 1. The product has flaws and needs improvement. 2. The product is excellent, but is naturally a niche item, too sophisticated for the general public. Even if one could argue that objectivism could be refined in some respects, that's not what explains its limited reach. The uncomfortable truth is the second hypothesis. Objectivism is a niche philosophy, a philosophy for a very small intellectual elite. It didn't fail to conquer culture. It simply never belonged in the mainstream. That doesn't mean it can't be influential. You don't need to be popular or numerous to be influential. Objectivists often believe that for Ayn Rand's ideas to shape culture, especially politics, a significant percentage of the population must be aligned with them. I don't believe that. Think of the Jewish people, a small minority, often unpopular, yet with disproportionate impact on economics, science, the arts, politics, shaping entire civilizations without ever being a majority anywhere. Or think of the Renaissance, a handful of people, in a few specific cities, redesigning the destiny of the entire West. This is a premise we must question if we want any real chance of success. Sometimes we cling to this goal of making objectivism popular for emotional reasons. Many objectivists feel alone, alienated from society, and want to heal this sense of social isolation by turning the people around them into objectivists. They feel that only in an objectivist society could they be happy, successful, have fulfilling relationships. I think this notion must be abandoned because it paralyzes us. It traps us in an impossible ideal. The loneliness of the objectivist must be healed in another way. But for objectivism to become influential, it doesn't need to win over a large percentage of the population. It only needs to win over the few who move the world. Another equally problematic assumption concerns the intellectual potential of the average man. Many objectivist leaders assume that every human being, because he is a rational animal, has the potential to assimilate objectivist ideas if exposed to good arguments. But in my view, this optimism about the rationality of the masses is one of the main beliefs sabotaging the potential of objectivism. And I want to challenge this optimism by presenting a theory that, I believe, should be integrated into the movement if we want to truly impact society. It's called spiral dynamics. The theory was developed by Clare Graves and Don Beck in the last century, and it essentially states something simple and profound, that the human mind develops through specific stages, and that each stage acts like a rigid frame, conditioning and limiting thought. To draw a parallel, imagine explaining to a 5-year-old the concept of delayed gratification. She understands the words, she understands the logic, but for some reason, we know that actually applying that concept will be much easier for her at 30. She grasps the idea, but doesn't fully live it. The same happens with adults. A young person may read Atlas Shrugged in a week and be fascinated, but if he isn't intellectually mature yet, it may take years, or even decades, for him to truly internalize those principles. This is the kind of limitation that spiral dynamics makes explicit. According to the theory, human consciousness evolves through a sequence of stages. Each person is born at the most basic level, and, over the course of life, may move upward into more complex mental structures, although many people spend their entire lives in the early stages. For clarity, the theory uses colors. At the most primitive level is beige, essentially the state of instinctive survival. Above it is purple, the tribal magical stage, where the world is explained through spirits, omens, invisible forces. Next comes red, the impulsive mind of power, force, domination. After red comes blue, the level of order, absolute rules, discipline, duty. It structures entire societies. The next stage is orange, oriented towards science, practical reason, entrepreneurship, material progress, and individual independence. Above it is green, prioritizing equality, dialogue, empathy, community, and questioning rigid hierarchies. These first 6 stages form what the theory calls the first tier. In it, each level believes its worldview is the only correct one. The levels compete with each other. Starting at yellow, something changes qualitatively. This is the second tier, where a person begins to see that all earlier stages have a function. Each one solved a real human problem. Thinking becomes more flexible, more integrative, and at turquoise, this integration expands into a holistic vision of reality. The theory suggests that, among adults, only a small minority reaches the higher levels. Few are in beige, around 10% in purple, 20% in red, 40% in blue, 30% in orange, 10% in green, about 1% in yellow, and maybe 0.1% in turquoise. If the theory is correct, this means that many of the cultural problems objectivism tries to fight, tribalism, mysticism, rationalistic dogmatism, violent impulsiveness, are not merely bad ideas from bad philosophies. They are natural expressions of mental structures that may take many years for an individual to outgrow, and much of the population may be incapable, intellectually, of transcending these early stages. You can make these people read Atlas Shrugged, but the ideas will remain floating abstractions, like delayed gratification for a small child. So what does this mean in practice? It means that if we want to be culturally influential and promote a healthier society, we must act with this psychological reality in mind. We cannot turn reds or blues into turquoises through irrefutable arguments. What we can and must do is promote healthier versions of each level, versions more compatible with political freedom, versions that work within the realistic limitations of each mental structure, rather than expecting people to transcend those limitations before we can have any impact. The central question should be, how can we take the principles of objectivism and present them attractively to each stage, speaking the language of that stage? How do we bring Rand's core ideas to the battlefield of red, to the cathedral of blue, to the business table of orange, to the charity institution of green? The same message, reason, self-esteem, happiness, individual rights, freedom, translated for completely different psychological structures. I'm not proposing that we reform objectivism. It can remain exactly as it is, but we must recognize that only those who are already in orange or above, perhaps only those who have reached the second tier, can fully adopt it. We can continue teaching the philosophy to improve the lives of a minority, but that goal must be separated from the ambition of impacting society and promoting political freedom. Objectivists, in general, avoid association with divergent ideas, and that is dangerous, because if we don't help the lower stages become healthier versions of themselves, we leave these people vulnerable to dangerous intellectual influences. And this leads to exactly what we see today: a right and a left captured by their own shadows. We don't need to create watered-down versions of objectivism for each stage. The movement could simply support intellectuals, creators, and institutions that already promote these healthier versions of each level, helping them win the cultural battle against worse influences. We don't need to wait for a major cultural revolution to start acting. We can influence the mainstream right now. Spiral dynamics literature includes a fascinating concept: the conveyor belt. It explains why certain philosophies and religions became universal, because they are accessible to all stages and offer paths for a person to evolve from one stage to the next. The Bible can inspire someone at the magical/tribal level, the impulsive level, the absolutist level, the entrepreneurial level. Each stage finds something there. I'm not sure I agree that religions lead to the top of the spiral, but I like the metaphor of the conveyor belt, or the ladder. Objectivists often look at someone several steps below and say, rationally, you should be 5 steps higher. But because we identify imperfections in the intermediate steps, we fail to provide a path for the person to climb to the next level. Spiral dynamics can be a crucial tool here. It shows that you cannot go from the impulsive level straight to the rational, entrepreneurial level without first passing through the absolutist level. Just as a criminal or an addict often finds a way out through the rigid rules of religion, not through objectivism, unless he tries to adopt it dogmatically. This progression is not random. It is part of the natural development of the human mind. You don't need to agree with every detail of spiral dynamics. It is just one among many models of human development. But I ask that you consider its basic premises and the idea that just because someone has reached adulthood and their brain is fully formed, it doesn't mean their consciousness is ready for worldviews as complex as the one objectivism offers. The happy ending I imagine for objectivism is not a society that explicitly adopts its principles, nor a civilization transformed into a giant Galt's Gulch. The happy ending is a society where 40% of people defend freedom for religious reasons, 30% for entrepreneurial reasons, 10% for humanitarian reasons, and where the average citizen may have never heard of Ayn Rand, yet lives as if she were right. It's like someone who lives in a skyscraper without knowing anything about engineering, yet is supported by the intelligence of its structure. In my ideal future, objectivists would not be part of the masses. They would be a small but influential minority, working behind the scenes. We would be the kind of group about which conspiracy theories are born, except, in this case, it would be a conspiracy for good. If someone peeked behind the curtain and discovered the supposed hidden forces moving civilization, they would not find parasites or manipulators, but benevolent guides, helping people ascend the spiral in the most dignified way possible. A society based on freedom and individual rights can exist even given the limitations of the majority, but the people who will promote and preserve such a society must have a realistic understanding of human nature and psychology in order to be effective. I believe this is how the great cycles of prosperity of the last centuries emerged. Thomas Aquinas did not ask the faithful to abandon religion. He offered a more rational version of it. The founding fathers did not demand that the people renounce their traditions. They offered interpretations of those traditions more compatible with political freedom, individualism, and progress. Objectivists often lament the philosophical loopholes left in the American system. But I want to end this speech with a provocative question, and I want you to answer it honestly. If an objectivist had written the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution with perfect philosophical precision, making everything explicit from the start, would the United States have survived until today? Thank you.